SDG 10, reduced inequalities. Again, this is another one of the SDGs that's very easy to relate to. So the underlying principle for SDG 10 is to reduce inequality within and among countries. And have a look at a few statistics here. The pandemic has caused the first rise in between country income equality in a generation. And you can see there that the COVID-19 projection is an increase in 1.2% in the inequalities. 5,895 migrants lost their lives in 2021. That's a very large number. That's the deadliest year since 2017 for migrants. Another disturbing statistic is that 1 in 5 people have experienced discrimination on at least one of the grounds prohibited under international human rights law. The global refugee figure hits a record high. I think many of us would have been expecting that to some extent. The war in Ukraine pushes the world total even higher. The number of refugees outside their country of origin has increased by 44% between 2015 and 2021. It was standing at 216 per 100,000 people in 2015 and is now, or in mid last year, 311 per 100,000 people. The refugee crisis, I think many of us are very aware of that, obviously from what we see on the news, and also the fact that we probably, I think a lot of us expect more of that to come as a result of the issues that we're going to have with climate change, which is driven largely by CO2 emissions, as we know. So there are 10 targets in SDG 10. The first one, SDG target 10.1, by 2030, progressively achieve and sustain income growth of the bottom 40% of the population at a rate higher than the national average. Again, this is trying to bias towards the people who are more disadvantaged. You may have heard this before, but the richest 10% of the population possess half of the global income. Across all world regions, the top 10% income share is between 35 and 60%, and in some sub-Saharan countries it's even higher than this. What do you think about that gap? Do you think that gap is evident in Ireland? Have you any experience of that? How are we going to measure this? How are we going to monitor this? What indicators are we going to use? So the proposed indicator is growth rates of household expenditure or income per capita among the bottom 40% of the population and of the total population. Clearly, that's the way to measure that. Target 10.2, by 2030, empower and promote the social, economic and political inclusion of all, irrespective of age, sex, disability, race, ethnicity, origin, religion, economic or any other status. What is most important for how healthy, wealthy and educated you are is not who you are, but where you are. Your knowledge and how hard you work matter too, but much less than the one factor that is entirely outside anyone's control. Whether you happen to be born into a productive industrialized economy or not. Global income inequality is vast. I think we're all familiar with that. Just looking at the list of the world's richest people in compared to the world's poorest people. So how do we monitor this? The indicator here is proportion of people living below 50% of the median income by sex, age and persons with disabilities. 10.3. Ensure equal opportunity and reduce inequalities of outcome, including eliminating discriminatory laws, policies and practices and promoting appropriate legislation, policies and actions in this regard. Do you think decision makers ever make policy decisions and laws that show a lack of regard for equality? Irish law pre-1974 discriminated against women. Can you think of any current discriminatory laws in Ireland or any other country? What impact do they have? I'm sure you can think of examples. Iran, what's happening in Iran at the moment is very disturbing. What's happening in China in relation to the Uyghurs is also very disturbing. You don't have to look too far. The indicator for this target, Proportion of population reporting having personally felt discriminated against or harassed in the previous 12 months on the basis of a ground of discrimination prohibited under international human rights law. Target 10.4 Adopt policies, especially fiscal, wage and social protection policies, and progressively achieve greater equality. A fiscal policy refers to the use of government spending and tax policies to influence economic conditions. The monitor for this, or the indicator for this, is the labour share of GDP and the redistributive impact of fiscal policy. 10.5 Improve the regulation and monitoring of global financial markets and institutions and strengthen the implementation of such regulations. I think for any of us who are old enough to remember the big, massive bust of 2008, we can see how important this particular SDG is. Such financial surveillance helps in investment decisions and policy making in the financial sector to work towards ensuring stability and performance. Knock-on effects for many of the economic and equality-based targets we have already discussed. The indicators for this target are financial soundness indicators, which we will discuss in more detail later. Target 10.6 Ensure enhanced representation and voice for developing countries in decision-making in global international economic and financial institutions to deliver more effective, credible, accountable and legitimate institutes. Ensure enhanced representation and voice for developing countries in decision-making in global international economic and financial institutions to deliver more effective, credible, accountable and legitimate institutions. The indicator here is the proportion of members and voting rights of developing countries in international organizations. Target 10.7 Facilitate orderly, safe, regular and responsible migration and mobility of people through the implementation of planned and well-managed migration policies. I think from an Irish perspective we can really appreciate how important migration policies are. Immigration has been a very important aspect of Irish life for the last 150 years. I think everyone is aware of the issues and debates around migration in Ireland. While we are doing very well, there have been a number of troubling developments in the last couple of years. What are your thoughts on this target? And what do you think of the indicators? Recruitment costs borne by employees as a proportion of monthly income earned in country of destination, as one indicator for target 10.7. Number of countries with migration policies that facilitate orderly, safe, regular and responsible migration and mobility of people. Number of people who died or disappeared in the process of migration towards an international destination. Target 10A. Implement the principle of special and differential treatment for developing countries, particularly least developed countries, in accordance with the World Trade Organization agreements. The indicator here is proportion of tariff lines applied to imports from least developed countries and developing countries with zero tariff. How do you think least developed countries will progress if they face the same tariffs as rich countries? Target 10B. Encourage official development assistance and financial flows, including foreign direct investment, to states where the need is greatest, in particular least developed countries, African countries, small island developing states, and landlocked developing countries, in accordance with their national plans and programs. The indicator for this target is the total resource flow for development by recipient and donor countries by type. And if you think, as per the previous goal, how can we achieve global change if we do not recognize the current inequality and put measures in place to rectify this? These are all issues that I think are probably very relevant for all of us. Target 10C, by 2030, reduce to less than 3% of the transaction costs of migrant remittances and eliminate remittance corridors with costs higher than 5%. This is a particularly interesting target. Remittances represent the money sent by migrant workers back to their home countries. A remittance corridor is essentially the sum of remittances sent between two specific countries. Hundreds of billions of dollars are sent in remittances globally each year. A disproportionately large amount of this vast flow is captured in just a handful of bilateral channels. Do you think the remittance transaction costs of over 5% are fair? I think this is very poignant for a lot of people in Ireland, as many developments happened in Ireland as a result of the money that was sent back from Britain, the UK, America, Canada, Australia over the years from people working there. I think many people were fortunate at the time to have various systems in place where you could send money fairly safely. But the idea that it's been capitalized on, which it is, so interesting little statistic here that the global average cost of sending $200 decreased from 9.3% of the amount sent in 2011 to 7.42% in 2016 and 6.3% in 2021, getting closer to the international target of 5%. But you can see 9.3% seems to be a really excessive fee for that, considering how much money is being handled. So there we are, target 10 or goal 10, 10 targets. It might become as a bit of a shock to many people, but approximately 326,000 millionaires in Ireland. That is quite an interesting figure. The gap between the rich and poor is pretty significant in Ireland. Discriminatory laws, these need to be got rid of. Monitoring financial services. Yeah. Do you think this is important? I certainly think anyone who lived through or suffered through some of the consequences of the meltdown in 2008 would probably consider that very important. Migration. Inequality, the impact of where you were born and where you live. Voice and voting rights for developing countries. Remittance costs. All very important issues that we will explore in detail in the unit itself.